Greetings, my loves. So welcome to another episode of Shakti Temple Talks. And today I want to go into what I call the axis of agony and ecstasy. And this is in relation to our sexuality and our experience of sex. Why I want to go into this is that the energy of sexuality, our experience of sexuality, can take us in. I really want us to start to embrace the full spectrum of what it means to be sexual beings. Sexual energy is the reason why all of us here are here. Sex is why all of us are here. We were all created through this act. So within the energy of sex, within our sexual energy, contains the whole seed of life. Right? The whole spectrum of life is contained therein, which means the darkness and the light. And when we just focus on the light, when we just focus on the bliss, just focus on the pleasure, we are eventually going to find ourselves conflicted. Because that's not all there is, because that's not the only experience of life or of our sexuality. We might focus here, but behind our back, behind our shoulder is looming this shadow energy, whispering to us, speaking to us, saying, I'm here, and we might try to turn every other direction instead of facing it. But that is there, and that energy is death. That energy, along with the conception of each and every one of us, the energy of death comes with us. With every birth comes death, and death walks with us through the entirety of our life. Now, this is one of the powerful things within the experience of sex and sexuality, and specifically orgasm. When we orgasm, there's a little annihilation. The French even call it le petit mort, which is a little death. Right? But it's an ecstatic death. It's one that's less terrifying than the actual one that kind of looms over us. So what I want to speak with about this in this spectrum of agony to ecstasy, right? We have a tendency to be fixated on the ecstatic aspects of sexuality and wanting to enhance those and focus on those. But there's a healing that needs to happen before we can really go into this realm. And that healing can only happen when we acknowledge the full spectrum of what sex and sexuality is for us, especially in this day and age where there has been so much just density put around sex and sexuality over millennia. Right? And so we are in this era where there's a huge reclamation happening with this energy of re-sanctifying it, of taking all that guilt and the shame and all these threads out of it, right? Now with that, there's an acknowledgement that this energy, it can be creative, as in that spectrum of ecstasy. It can also be very destructive, those realms of agony, right? This is especially obvious in the female sexual experience, where, I work with women on a regular basis, and in my own personal journey, this is also true, where there can be a lot of pain involved in our sexual experience, whether that's a miscarriage as a result of a sexual experience, whether that's pain during intercourse, whether that's the contraction of an STD or some other kind of infection. There's this whole spectrum. It's not just one thing. And when we fixate on the good and the pleasurable, but we simultaneously also have these other experiences, it's not possible to integrate them. We create a schism, and that schism actually ends up reinforcing guilt and shame and confusion around our sexuality. And so there's a huge importance in holding the full spectrum, in honoring that dark goddess that comes along, the queen of death that comes along with our sexuality, of really being able to turn and look at her and integrate the darker faces of sexuality. I mean, some of the most atrocious crimes against humanity are done through the misuse of sexuality. This is one of the greatest epidemics on our planet, and that lives in all of us. That lives in the collective field of sexual energy, because sexual energy is creative energy. It's what created all that is. And we each have our own little storehouse of this universal energy that is a gift to us. It's our gift of life force, but even though it's individuated in each of us, it's still connected to the whole energy of creation. So everything that exists in creation exists in this energy for us. That's why so many of us are doing so much work to purify this energy, because there is a lot happening in the collective around this and in our ancestry around this. So what the journey looks like, or the spectrum of agony and ecstasy, is first of all an acknowledgement of not just the orgasmic aspects of this, but also the death aspects, abortion. There's so many experiences we can go through around our sexuality that are challenging. And I really want to speak to this because there is such a focus right now on just the orgasmic and becoming more and more orgasmic, and this can actually cause a schism if that's not our experience, right? And so it's like we want to start to contain, because it's actually when we can contain the full spectrum, that agony to ecstasy spectrum, that we can start to really unlock and really truly go into those deeper sexual realms. Sexuality has a darkness to it. It just does. And that darkness has a need for expression and for integration and for embrace, as does the light aspects. We literally can have the most beautiful, intimate experiences of communion through our sexuality. And we can have some of the most horrific experiences of humanity through our sexuality. And so what we're doing on this spectrum is we are transmuting. And what we're transmuting that agony, we're transmuting the darkness into the ecstasy, right? But to do this, the difference between transmutation and transformation is when we transform, we change something into something else, or there's also this idea that we're getting rid of something. We can't get rid of something that's part of the whole. It's not possible. We transmute. A transmutation means that we take what actually just simply is. It's almost a process of acceptance. And it's through that acceptance and then the integration that we start to transmute. We turn our poison into our beauty. We turn our lead into gold, right? It is because of this intense experience that we're then able to even go deeper into this other side of the spectrum. I know so many women and just humans who have had some of the darkest experiences of sexuality. And as a result of that, it opened their spectrum up to a whole other level, to where they can contain this whole other level of the ecstatic within that, because they touched into this and they didn't let it shut them down. They actually let it open them even further. So this is that spectrum that we're all dancing within sexuality. And the invitation in sharing this is that we really start to embrace that full spectrum. If we are in one of the darker phases or experiences of sexual energy, how do we not try to shut it out or not be there? No, how do we use it as a teacher and as a tool? And I want to speak just briefly about using the Yoni egg practices, and particularly different crystals, just to work with these energies, right? So in my teachings, in the Jade Temple teachings, I work with 3 stones specifically, Jade being the number 1 pillar, kind of pinnacle of the practice, and the ally stones being rose quartz and obsidian, and specifically I carry star rose quartz and rainbow obsidian. And so when we are in that realm of, so I want to speak a bit about how to use these stones to work through that spectrum, right? So when we have, here's some rainbow obsidian, when we have that darkness, right, that energy that needs transmutation, what we need to do is go in. This is like the journey of Inanna. This is like the Inanna's descent, that going into the underworld, that actually like hearing the whisper of that dark goddess and going and facing this darker aspect of our sexuality in order to integrate it. Now, rainbow obsidian is amazing for this process because not only is this a volcanic stone from the earth, it's literally like kind of a stone from the underworld, from the womb of the earth, birthed of that fiery, creative energy. But with the rainbow obsidian specifically, and also that catalyzing force of the fire that helps to transmute, with that rainbow, there's an acknowledgement that our, the darker experiences of our life actually become that whole full spectrum ray of frequency, of color, of beauty that we end up that we end up embodying when we have integrated that which is darker. So this stone really helps with transmutation of those darker experiences of sexuality. Now, it is not for the faint of heart, this stone. It will really accelerate the path. So we'll have to transmute these energies this lifetime or another regardless, right? This will speed it up, which means it can bring stuff up rapid fire, right? And sometimes this can be very graceful depending on what we're working with, and at other times it can be very challenging and an intense process. So we want to work with this stone very intentionally and very mindfully to start that transmutational process. Now, the other ally stone that I encourage working with is star rose quartz. And what I love about the star rose quartz is it's a great next step after working with the obsidian. So the obsidian, we start to churn that stuff, kind of like cleaning out the underworld of our womb and of our bodies, of our being. And so as that's churning and we go into that process, it can be a little bit raw. So then we move to rose quartz. And the rose quartz has this very sweet, soothing energy, right? So the obsidian's very womb-centric. It's very much earth energy, that earth fire energy. Then the rose quartz helps then to connect us into the heart. Yeah? So now we're creating a channel between the womb and the heart, and specifically the restoration of innocence. Yeah, so when we're on that end of the spectrum where we're in that agony, it's really hard if we have experienced trauma or violation to tune into the innocence of our sexuality, the purity held innately within that energy. There's all these layers. So we transmute, and then we move into the rose quartz, which helps us to really come into that place of purity, that place of renewed innocence, that place of the virgin. And what I find so powerful about the star rose quartz is literally there's a star held within this, and that star to me represents that pure essence, right? The center of that spark that is untainted, that is pure, beautiful life force energy, that is connected to love, that is connected to beauty, that is connected to the divine, right? And so the rose quartz helps to open that channel between the womb and the heart, where that energy becomes pure again, where it becomes sweet again, where it becomes innocent and playful. and not naive, not that level again, because we've already integrated, we understand the spectrum now, but that we bring levity to this energy and we renew it. And again, we kind of come to this state of virginity or wholeness, one unto oneself. From there, we move to the peak of this spectrum, which is with Jade. And Jade really helps to balance that full spectrum, to bring the dark and the light into that central point. It's an adaptogen, so it helps us to come into center and alignment. The Jade is all about that higher wisdom, that higher attunement, that higher alignment, so that vertically channeled sexual energy. It helps us to refine, to contain, to balance, to harmonize, to wield this energy with great wisdom, great discernment, and great power. So when we stepped into the Jade, we step into that priestess place where we are deeply anchored, and because of that deep anchor and that work that we've already done prior, we can then expand into these places of ecstasy where we are no longer losing ourselves into the experience, but it's almost like a deeper revelation of the self. This is the difference between the explosive orgasm and the implosive orgasm that actually brings us deeper into the essence of who we really are. So that is Jade. That is Jade. It's a centrifugal force. It draws everything back into the center where it can churn and become power and vitality and creativity and beauty in the world. So these are the 3 stones, and how we can work with them successively to come into this place of fully integrated power, full integration of that sexual spectrum of agony to ecstasy. Now, all of these stones can be found in my Shakti shop. They come with a beautiful manual that teaches some practices that you can use for these 3 stones for these purposes on this journey. There is also a bundle where you can get all 3 of these stones together, and you save some money when you buy them all together to assist your journey. So you can go to that Shakti shop link that is below this video and buy these beautiful allies who can assist you on this journey, on this full spectrum of agony to ecstasy. Thank you for tuning in and listening and claiming the full breadth of your sexual experience.